Okay, so as per request, I'm going to be making a video of how I make my arrow shafts split from logs. So this is what they look like when they're all done. They're cut to 27 inches long, because that's my draw length, and they're right about 1/4 of an inch in diameter, probably a little bit more, but obviously I'm not going to be able to get it perfect because I'm making these by hand. But I'm going to show you guys exactly what goes into making these. So I start with a piece of wood. This one is 4 inches in diameter. This is a root from a tree that we were chopping down, so I saw the root and it was fairly long and straight. I decided it would make for good arrow shafts, and I split it up into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. This one right here is about the size that I will take and turn into an arrow shaft. Now, a key thing to note is you can see even on this small little piece, there's a lot of radial cracks from how the wood dried, and that is a very important thing to take into account, because this also happens to have a lot of cracks. And let's say I was splitting pieces from this log. This I'm not, because this one's too short for my arrows. But all of these cracks, you need to cut, or I cut my arrow shafts about 2 inches longer than I know I'm going to need them, because of all of the cracks that can be on both sides of the wood. So I just cut them a little bit longer than I think I'm going to need, just to account for those cracks. And as for the tools that you're going to need, I usually only use 4 tools mainly. The first thing I'll use is some sort of hatchet or axe to not only chop the bits of wood, but also to just hog off a lot of material really quickly from those pieces, because they're still slightly too big for turning into arrow shafts. I will use a mallet to help the hatchet along with chopping the wood. I will use a really big knife, and this will do about 90% of the work to get the arrow shafts down to the size they need to be. And then most of the rest of that work is done with just a small little block plane. This one I got from Home Depot for like 15 bucks. So, and the last thing I use is just some sandpaper. This is cheap dollar store sandpaper. I don't recommend it. It's just the only thing that I had, so that's what I'm going to use. Alright, so the first thing I'll use is the hatchet to just hog off a lot of the material and get it down to about a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square. And after I get it down to about the size I'm looking for, there you go, that's when I'm going to pull out a knife, and I'm going to just start sort of hacking it away like this. I try to keep it square, so I try not to work corners down. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but I'm going to try to keep it on, keep chopping off material from the 1, 2, 3, and 4 square sides of it, because if you chop off the corners, it's a lot harder to evenly get down this piece of wood to the size you want it to be. But I'll just keep hogging off small bits of material, and if you guys had a shave horse or even just a vise, you can use that. Most of the time I'll just rest it on the chopping block, or I'll rest it on my knee and sort of just take off wood like that. But I get this down to about the diameter of my my index finger, which is just slightly bigger than the actual diameter that I want to make the arrow shaft. Well, I think that just about does majority of the work with the knife. You can see how crooked this is, so it's definitely going to need to be straightened over a fire. I mean, you could shoot it, it just probably wouldn't fly very straight. But that's just about all the work I'm going to do with the knife. I might do a little bit of refining, but from now on, most of the work I'm going to do is with my little bench plane. Just move that out the way. Just taking off really small, even smaller bits of wood than the knife did. And just refine it to the diameter you want your arrow shaft to be. And then there's an example of the finished one and an actual arrow that is very, very straight. A lot straighter compared to these arrow shafts. Another thing to consider is to be building something like this, which is just 3 pieces of wood stacked together with the middle one set down slightly. And the width of this middle piece has to be just about the diameter that you want your arrow shaft to be. And then same with this measurement here from how deep into these 2 pieces it's set. So since I'm wanting about 5/16 inch arrow shaft, this piece of wood is about a little bit more than 5/16, and it's set down about 5/16. And the reason for that is so that when this is small enough, it's not small enough to fit in there right now, but we got an example arrow shaft here. When they're small enough to fit in this channel, you can just take your bench plane and run it along the top of this, and then you can just turn your dowel as you're, planing. So what that does is it gets it a little bit more even, I find. But I personally don't use, I don't even know what they're called. If you do, let me know. But I personally don't use one of these because I find it just slows me down. I don't like them very much. I built one. It's right there, but I just don't use it very much. I find that I'm a little bit faster and a little bit more efficient just by doing it by eye, with just planing without using a special jig like that. So that's just something to consider. I don't use it. I don't think I'm faster using it. I just prefer to plane on my knee, just like this. So. And towards the end, when I'm getting really, really close to the finished arrow shaft, I'll really start slowing down and being really careful about where I remove material and how much material I remove, because one bad movement with the plane can really screw up your whole arrow shaft, and you don't want that. So just be a little bit more cognizant about how you're moving it and how fast you're planing and how much material you're removing. But that's just about done. All I gotta do left, or all I have left to do, is cut it and then sand it to how I want it. And then after that, I'm gonna straighten it, because you can see you can really see how wobbly it is there. But I have a little bit more material to remove right here on the end, and a little bit right here in the middle, just to knock down these ridges. But that's about 95% of the way there. And something else I wanted to show you, just another thing to consider. This is an arrow I made from just a stick. This wasn't split from a log. This is, you can really see how wobbly it is there, but this is just a branch that I cut off from a tree. And these, while it's a lot faster to just cut off a branch as opposed to having to split a whole log to get a small section, these I find, well, you can see all of these knots in there, and that's not ideal. Those are all weak points in the arrow shaft, and just another place where it is more likely to split. But you can also just see how all of those knots make it like bend back and forth, and that's not what you want. You want a mostly straight arrow shaft, but it will fly, not very straight, not very accurately, but it will work. So if you just don't have access to really any logs, but you can find straight sticks, like if you have dogwood, that's really good wood to use for arrow shafts, and a lot of Native American tribes use those. Another thing is river cane, and those are just really good because they grow up towards the sun. They don't try and make a really thick trunk and then, you know, spread out small branches that are leaning like this, that are bending towards the ground. They grow straight up, so generally they're really straight and they have very few to no knots at all. I just don't happen to have access to those in my area, which is why I'm making them split from a log. So this is almost to the way there. I'm gonna keep planing it down, finish it, and then I'll show you how I sand it. Just to show you, this is what the shop looks like after making only a few arrows. You get a lot of shavings everywhere from the plane, but it's all planed down now. Now all that's left to do is sand and straighten it. Now for sanding, there's a lot of different tricks you can use. You can put the arrow shaft in a drill and then just wrap the sandpaper around it, and it'll just, since the arrow shaft will keep spinning, that'll work really well. But I'm trying to do this with hand tools, so I don't really want to use a drill. It takes longer, yeah, but I just think it's a little bit more rewarding. So if you want to be a little bit faster, you can do that by all means. This is just some cheap 100 grit sandpaper, and I just rub it back and forth along the length of the arrow shaft to make sure it's nice and smooth. And then after I'm happy and I've removed a majority of the highs and lows, and I can run my hand across it without fear of getting splinters, what I'll do is I'll take a bunch of these little curls from the plane, and I'll set the arrow shaft right in them, and I'll use this almost like, oh crap, it's a little splinter, but so you might want to wear gloves while you're doing this, but almost like sandpaper. And what this does is it just burnishes the wood, so it makes it nice and smooth, nice and shiny. It doesn't really do anything, I just like it for aesthetics because it just makes the shaft just that more pleasant, or a little bit more pleasant to handle. So it's an extra step, but I do it, and that makes it really nice and smooth. Alright, so I'm at the fire pit, and I'm going to use all the shavings from the arrow shafts to start the fire. I'm going to use them to make a bird's nest to use with chalk cloth. And I'm going to make sure to keep these arrow shafts very far away from there, because I do not want those to get in the fire. I do not want to burn these up. And how I like to straighten them, is I just keep them near the fire. I don't want to put it in the fire, but I figure out where the bend is. So there's one right about here in this arrow shaft, and I get that part nice and hot. I'll put it in and out of the fire a few times, but not enough to burn it, just enough to heat it up, and then I'll bend it. Once it's warm to the touch, I'll bend it to where so that it's just a little bit more straight. And you can This can go very wrong very quickly, so just be careful not to burn any of your arrow shafts. Okay, that's one arrow shaft done. I got 3 left to go. Just take your time and be patient with it, because it can take a minute. So after about 10-15 minutes, I got all 4 of these arrow shafts to be just about as straight as I can get them. Can't see very well down there, but there you go. It's a better angle. And that is plenty straight for my needs. So, there you go. That is the end of today's video, and now you know how to make arrow shafts. Split from a log.